I still remember the exact sound the front door made when it swung open that afternoon. Not the gentle click of someone entering respectfully, but the sharp, entitled shove of a man who believed every place he stepped into belonged to him. I was in the kitchen washing dishes, humming quietly to myself, thinking about dinner and the errands I needed to run, when I heard his footsteps crossing the living room like a judge approaching a podium. My father-in-law had always carried himself with an air of superiority, the kind of rigid old-school arrogance that came from decades of controlling his family through fear and financial manipulation. But that day the arrogance was multiplied. It hung in the air before he even spoke. I dried my hands slowly, breathing through the tension rising in my chest because I already knew. The moment he arrived without warning, without knocking, without even announcing himself, nothing about this visit would be pleasant. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything, but first, if you enjoy stories like this, you want to be part of the 10% viewers who click on the like button. It makes us really happy. If you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly support us today by subscribing to this channel. This helps us to bring you more beautiful stories. It will be great to tell us where you are watching us from in the comment section. He appeared in the kitchen doorway with a smirk stretched across his face, the kind that told you the conversation wasn't going to be a conversation at all, but a declaration. "You're home," he said, as though I needed confirmation. I forced a polite nod, already bracing myself. "Yes. Can I help you with something?" He scoffed lightly and stepped further into the room, glancing around as though inspecting a property he had put on the market. "You can start," he said sharply, "by explaining why you're still here." I blinked in confusion, unsure what he meant. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed with the confidence of someone delivering a final verdict. "This is my son's house," he said. "And he may tolerate you living here, but I won't. It's time for you to leave." At first I thought he was joking, some twisted attempt at humor that landed flat. But one look at his face told me there was nothing humorous about his intentions. My heart thudded once, loudly, before my mind caught up. "Leave," I repeated slowly, unsure whether he had lost his mind or simply felt emboldened enough to rewrite reality for his own convenience. "Yes," he said firmly. "You've stayed long enough. Pack your things. My son deserves better, and I won't watch you drag him down anymore." The audacity of his tone, the certainty in his words, the way he spoke as though he were delivering a righteous punishment. It stunned me. My breath caught halfway in my throat. He truly believed the house belonged to his son. He believed he had the authority to remove me. And worse, he believed he had discovered an opportunity to assert dominance over me while my husband was away. "What gives you the right to tell me to leave my own home?" I asked, my voice trembling not from fear but disbelief. The kind that arrives when someone bulldozes boundaries you didn't even know they had the nerve to cross. He laughed, and it was the coldest sound I'd heard from him yet. "You're home," he mocked. "My dear, the only reason you live under this roof is because my son pays the mortgage. Not you. You contribute nothing. You've leeched off him long enough, and I won't let it continue." My hands tightened at my sides. His ignorance would have been amusing if it weren't so insulting. He had no idea how wrong he was. No idea how little he understood about this house, its history, or the documents stored neatly in the drawer just a few feet away. But he wasn't done. Oh no, he was just warming up. "This arrangement," he said while gesturing around the kitchen with theatrical disdain, "ends today. I came here to give you a generous warning. Pack a bag, find somewhere else to stay, and let my son reclaim his life." His voice dripped with superiority, and something in me hardened. The kind of hardness that comes when someone has pushed far past the line of disrespect and into the territory of delusional entitlement. I realized then that he didn't come here by accident. He came because he saw himself as the gatekeeper of his son's decisions. He believed he still controlled everything. The finances, the house, the marriage. And he believed I was powerless. I took a slow breath, steadying myself because reacting emotionally would have given him exactly what he wanted. A scene he could twist into justification. Instead, I asked calmly, "What exactly makes you think this house belongs to your son?" He raised an eyebrow, offended at the question. "Because he told me he handled the purchase," he snapped. "He said he took on the financial responsibility. He promised me he wouldn't let you ruin him, and yet here you are, nesting like this place belongs to you." He gestured around again. "You need to leave before I make this official. Don't make this harder than it has to be." It was surreal listening to him speak with such confidence while being so painfully wrong. My husband had indeed let his father believe he bought the house. Mostly to avoid arguments, mostly to avoid being belittled. But the truth was something my father-in-law had never bothered to consider. That his son trusted me more than he trusted the man standing in my kitchen. That his son had made choices long before marriage that were none of his father's business. And that the deed had a single signature, one he never expected. I stepped closer to him, his smug expression not wavering for a second. "You're mistaken," I said quietly. "Very mistaken." He laughed again, waving me off as though I were a child speaking out of turn. "I'm not mistaken," he barked. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. My son would never buy a house and put it in your name. Don't be ridiculous." I stared at him, not because he was right but because he was so gloriously, confidently wrong. And he had walked into my home ready to throw me out based on assumptions built on ego. "You know nothing about the deed," I said. He smirked. "I know everything." That was the moment, the exact moment, I decided I wasn't going to be gentle. I wasn't going to be patient. I wasn't going to let the man who belittled me for years stand in my kitchen and act like he was the landlord and I was the intruder. So I nodded once, walked toward the drawer by the dining table and pulled out a folder thick with paperwork. I held it calmly at my side as his eyes narrowed with suspicion and arrogance in equal measure. And then I said, "If you really think you own this house, let's take a look at something together." His smile faltered. Just a little. But enough for me to know. This man had absolutely no idea what was about to hit him. My father-in-law's eyes locked onto the folder in my hand with a mixture of irritation and curiosity, the kind men like him reserve for anything they don't immediately understand, or can't immediately control. He straightened, puffing out his chest as though expanding his physical presence could compensate for the shrinking authority he sensed beneath his feet. I placed the folder gently on the table, not opening it yet, just letting it sit there between us like a quiet, ticking truth. His smirk returned, but it wasn't as confident as before. It wobbled at the edges, desperate to hold its shape. "Really?" he scoffed. "You think waving some papers around will change anything? I know what belongs to my son. I know what he told me. But I could already feel it, the shift in the room, subtle but undeniable. He wasn't as certain as he pretended to be." I leaned my hand on the back of a chair and studied him. "What exactly did he tell you?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain calm even as adrenaline pulsed quietly through me. He crossed his arms, a gesture meant to intimidate. "He told me," he said, speaking slowly as if explaining economics to a toddler, "that he bought this house. He negotiated the price. He pays the mortgage. And he is the reason you're not homeless." The arrogance in that statement nearly knocked the breath out of me. Not because it hurt, I had heard far worse from him over the years, but because it was so absurdly inaccurate that the temptation to laugh bubbled up uninvited. So I swallowed it down. This wasn't the moment to let emotion lead. This was the moment to let truth dismantle him piece by piece. "He told you that?" I asked quietly. "Yes," he snapped. "And unlike you, my son doesn't lie." That was rich, coming from a man who had rewritten history every chance he got. But the real irony was even sharper. My husband had told him those things not because they were true, but because he wanted to protect me from his father's interference. He knew his father would harass him endlessly if he admitted the truth, that I had been the one with the inheritance savings, that I had negotiated the purchase, that I had signed the deed alone. My husband, for all his flaws, had understood one thing clearly. Giving his father even a sliver of information could allow him to wedge himself into our marriage like a crowbar. So he let the old man believe a story that fed his ego. And now that lie, that harmless lie meant to spare us months of criticism, was being used as a weapon. My father-in-law took a step closer, his expression darkening, and jabbed a finger toward me. "Your time in this house is over. My son is on a work trip and he left me in charge of sorting things out. He's tired of carrying you, and frankly, so am I." The confidence with which he delivered that fabricated narrative was astonishing. For a moment, I wondered how deeply he truly believed in this fictional authority he had created for himself. Did he genuinely think he could walk into our home and declare control over a life he was only connected to by blood and ego? Or was this simply the latest in a long line of attempts to diminish me, the daughter-in-law who refused to bend, refused to shrink, refused to fear him? I took a slow breath, meeting his stare. You're lying, I said softly. He recoiled as if I had slapped him. Excuse me. You heard me. The air thickened. His jaw clenched. His nostrils flared. Men like him were not used to being called out, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. You think I'm lying? He barked. You think my son wouldn't confide in me? I've known him longer than you've been alive. You're nothing but a... He stopped himself, but the venom behind the unfinished insult told me exactly what he wanted to say. And I had had enough. Your son didn't tell you anything, I said firmly. He would never ask you to come here and threaten me. He knows better than that. He stepped forward again, trying to tower over me. I'm warning you, he growled. If you won't leave willingly, I'll make a call. I'll bring people here who will remove you. Don't test me. But there was the ultimatum. The attempt to use fear as a leash. He had always relied on intimidation, slamming doors, raising his voice, twisting words until people backed down simply to avoid the chaos. But this time it wasn't working. And I could see the first flicker of doubt cross his features, a crack in the porcelain of his authority. Call whoever you want, I said calmly. But before you embarrass yourself, you should know exactly whose house you're standing in. His laugh was harsh, loud, echoing through the kitchen like the cackle of someone teetering on the edge of desperation. Oh please, he sneered. Your delusions are getting worse. My son bought this place. My son pays for it. My son will decide who stays and who goes. He pointed toward the living room with a dismissive wave. Pack your things before he gets back. I won't have you shaming him anymore. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately, watching his eyes follow every movement. He leaned forward slightly, confident, too confident, that whatever I pulled out would be unimpressive, irrelevant, or easily dismissed. People like him always believed they were invincible. They believed paperwork, legality, signatures. None of that could stand up to their raw, unfiltered entitlement. But there's something about legal documents that terrifies controlling people. They don't bend to ego. They don't care about intimidation. They don't lie. I slid the official document from the folder and placed it on the table between us. Do you know what this is? I asked. He scoffed again, but the sound was weaker. Some nonsense you printed off Google? I pushed the paper closer. No, I said softly. It's the deed. Silence. A deep, heavy silence that thudded into the room like a dropped stone. His eyes darted to the paper, then back to me, then to the paper again. Confusion flickered first. Then denial. Then something much more satisfying, fear. He didn't touch it. Not yet. He just stared at it as if approaching it would confirm a truth he had no power to undo. I folded my arms and waited. Because the moment he picked up that paper, the house of lies he had built would come crashing down. For a long, stretched moment, my father-in-law just stood there, staring at the paper on the table as if it were some venomous creature waiting to strike. His arrogance, the armor he always wore, had not yet cracked fully, but it had begun to tremble. I could see it in the stiffness of his jaw, the sudden rigidity of his hands, the way his eyes darted toward the document and then away, as though avoiding it could somehow preserve his version of reality. I didn't rush him. I didn't speak. I simply waited, letting the truth sit there, quiet and heavy, like a weight he had no choice but to pick up eventually. The house, the foundation, the rooms he just attempted to claim, all of it was contained within that single sheet of legally binding paper. He let out a slow breath through his nose, the kind men release when they believe they're about to confirm their superiority. Then he stepped closer. His fingers hovered above the paper for a second before he grabbed it with sharp, irritated movements, as though snatching a confession from a stubborn witness. He lifted the deed, clearing his throat with theatrical annoyance. This better be good, he muttered, but there was something brittle under the surface. He scanned the top portion, eyes narrowing slightly. I watched every micro-expression. The fleeting confidence, the tightening confusion, the subtle panic that flickered behind his pupils once he realized he wasn't recognizing the words he expected to see. Then he reached the bottom half, the section where the legal owner is named. His eyes froze. His mouth parted. And for the first time since the day I married his son, I saw something I never believed I'd witness. He was speechless. He blinked rapidly as if trying to force the text to rearrange into something more acceptable. Something that aligned with the narrative he had rehearsed for years. He read it again, slower this time. Then once more deliberately. Each pass only deepened the disbelief etched across his face. He swallowed hard, a slight tremor running down his throat. Finally he looked up at me, his voice cracking with disbelief. Why is your name on this? There was the question I had been waiting for. The question he never imagined he would need to ask. I held his gaze steadily. Because it's my house, I said. I bought it. I signed for it. I own it. He stared at me as if I had just spoken a language not yet discovered by mankind. His fingers tightened around the edges of the deed, crinkling the corners slightly. No, he said, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. My son told me. He stopped abruptly, the realization beginning to dawn. Slowly, painfully, he lowered the deed back to the table as though it weighed significantly more now that truth had soaked into it. He told me he paid for it, he repeated, but the statement sounded less like confidence now and more like a man attempting to cling to the last plank of a sinking ship. He told you something convenient, I said calmly. Not because it was true, but because he didn't want to argue with you. His eyes darted back to the deed. But he wouldn't let you. He didn't let me, I interrupted. He didn't buy anything. I did. He blinked again, but the shock refused to leave his face. With what money? He demanded in a half-whisper, half-growl. The question was meant to humiliate me, to belittle me, to reduce my accomplishment into something small, accidental, or dependent. But I didn't flinch. I didn't bend. I didn't shrink the way he always expected me to. Instead, I straightened my posture and answered plainly. With the inheritance my grandmother left me, I said. I used it as the down payment and covered the entire purchase. Your son had no financial involvement. Not then. Not now. Not ever. He swayed slightly as though the truth destabilized something fundamental inside him. Pride? Control? His imagined authority? Maybe all three. He whispered again, hardly audible this time. But why didn't he tell me? I didn't even hesitate. Because he knew exactly how you'd react. And he knew you'd try to use it against us. The way his face twisted. Shock folding into anger, anger melting into humiliation, humiliation hardening again into rage, was almost theatrical. But beneath all those layers I saw something he could never admit aloud. Fear. Real fear. The kind that comes when someone realizes the power they believed they had was never theirs to begin with. You tricked him, he spat suddenly, clinging to a delusion because the truth was too devastating to accept. No, I replied softly. I protected him. I protected our life. I protected our peace from you. His nostrils flared. You're lying, he said loudly, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. My son wouldn't live in a house he doesn't own. I tilted my head slightly. He lives in a house his wife owns, I corrected. There's nothing unusual about that. The only person who seems bothered by it is you. That sentence hit him harder than any shout could have. His jaw tightened. His fists clenched. His breath came in short bursts. He had built his identity on control. Controlling his son, controlling their decisions, controlling the narrative of their lives. And now he stood here realizing he controlled nothing. Not the mortgage. Not the house. Not me. He slammed the deed down on the table, but the gesture lacked conviction. It was less an attack and more an act of desperation. This is unacceptable, he hissed. My son deserves better than this. Better than a wife who saved him from renting tiny apartments while you criticized his every step? I finished calmly. He froze again as though the truth were acidic. I took a step forward. You walked into this house today believing you could evict me. You believed you could decide my future. You believed you had the authority to control where I live. I tapped my fingers gently on the deed. But the truth is the opposite. You have no authority here. None. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. A strange sound escaped, half anger, half fear, all denial. The kind of noise men make when the pyramid they built on ego and assumptions collapses under a single undeniable fact. I picked up the deed and held it in front of him, my voice low but firm. This isn't your son's house, I said. This isn't your house. This is my house. He flinched visibly. And in that moment, for the first time since I had known him, he understood. He had just made a catastrophic mistake. My father-in-law stood completely frozen, his breath shallow, his eyes darting across the paper again as if hoping the ink would magically rearrange itself into something more favorable, something that restored the narrative he had lived inside for so long. But no matter how many times he blinked, how many times he swallowed hard, how many times he clenched and unclenched his fists, the truth remained staring back at him in bold letters. My name, not his son's, not his. It was almost painful to watch him realizing, piece by piece, that the power he believed he had, the power he had flaunted so loudly, never existed. The silence stretched thin between us, and for the first time since he barged into my home, he looked small. He broke the silence with a whisper that shook with disbelief. He let you do this? The question was so absurd, so drenched in outdated entitlement, that I needed a moment to process it. He still couldn't accept that I had the financial ability, the intelligence, the autonomy to buy a house. He needed to believe his son let me, as if my husband's permission determined my worth or capability. He didn't let me, I replied calmly. I made a choice. I invested my inheritance. I handled the negotiations. I did the work. And he supported me because that's what a partner does. My father-in-law's face tightened with frustration. He should have told me, he muttered, pacing in tiny, agitated steps. He should have said something. I'm his father. I'm supposed to know these things. I exhaled slowly, understanding something clearly for the first time. His anger wasn't just about the house. It was about the loss of control. About the idea that his son had a life, a marriage, and a home he wasn't the center of. Your son didn't tell you, I said gently, because he knew you'd try to take ownership of something that wasn't yours. He wanted peace. He chose privacy. That sentence hit him hard. His pacing stopped instantly. His shoulders tensed. His expression tightened into something darker, a mixture of humiliation and wounded pride. He wouldn't hide things from me, he insisted, but the tremble in his voice betrayed doubt. My father-in-law had always lived comfortably inside the illusion that he was the patriarch, the unquestioned authority. But here he was, confronting evidence that his son's adulthood had quietly slipped beyond his grasp. He grabbed the nearest chair and lowered himself into it, rubbing his forehead with both hands like a man trying to hold on to a crumbling identity. You blindsided me, he said suddenly, his tone shifting into accusation. You two made a fool out of me. I raised an eyebrow. We made a fool out of you. Or did you do that all on your own by barging into my house and trying to evict me based on a lie you told yourself? He looked up sharply, the sting of the words landing exactly where they were meant to. He hated being wrong. He hated being corrected. And he hated most of all being exposed. He slammed his palm against the table suddenly, desperation leaking through the cracks in his voice. I raised him, he shouted. I provided for him. And now you're telling me he lives in a house owned by... He stopped short again, struggling to choose a word that wouldn't cost him more dignity. Owned by who exactly? A woman. A wife he underestimated. Someone he thought he could intimidate endlessly? He couldn't finish the sentence because the truth hurt too much. The truth that his son had chosen someone who wouldn't bend under his pressure. You're telling me, he said finally, voice trembling with disbelief, that I have no say in what happens in this house? I stared at him evenly. None, I said. Not a single ounce. You have no legal authority here. No influence. No claim. Nothing. His eyes widened, the color rising in his cheeks. His pride, thick, brittle, and crusted from years of going unchallenged, was crumbling in real time. But your husband, he sputtered. What about my son's rights? This isn't his property, I said. He lives here because I invited him to live with me. That's how ownership works. The words pierced him so deeply he seemed to physically recoil. He sank back into the chair, stunned into silence. His world, the one where he held all power, was collapsing faster than he could gather the pieces. And then, as if grasping at the only weapon he had left, he leaned forward with a forced calmness and said, Well, fine. Even if that's true, even if your name is on the deed, he won't be happy when he finds out you kept this from me. I blinked slowly. Then I laughed, softly but unmistakably. He stiffened. My husband already knows, I said. We talked about it. He agreed with the decision. He has known for years. The only person who didn't know was you. And that was intentional. His face paled. My father-in-law gripped the armrests of the chair with white knuckles. So he lied to me, he whispered. My own son lied to me. There was pain in his voice, but not the kind that comes from genuine hurt. The kind that comes from realizing he'd lost possession of something he viewed as his property. He wasn't wounded that his son kept a secret. He was wounded that his son made a decision without him. I leaned against the table, my voice calm but firm. He didn't lie to hurt you. He lied to protect us from you. From this exact moment, the one where you'd walk into our home and try to dictate our lives. He inhaled sharply. The reality pierced straight through him. Then the final unraveling began. He stood abruptly, pointing a trembling finger at me. You manipulated him, he accused. You tricked him into this. You're trying to turn him against me. No, I said, stepping closer. You did that on your own. Every time you belittled him. Every time you treated him like a child. Every time you tried to insert yourself into decisions that weren't yours. You pushed him away and then you blamed everyone else. He staggered back a step. For the first time he wasn't angry. He was lost. I placed the deed back into the folder with deliberate care and slid it off the table. This isn't your kingdom, I said softly. This isn't your property. This isn't your decision. His eyes shimmered with humiliation, a storm of pride and disbelief swirling behind them. This is my home, I finished. And right now, you're the one who's overstayed. He stood there, chest heaving, mouth opening and closing like a man trying to rearrange the world with words, but failing each time. Because the truth had already won. And he had no throne left to stand on. For a long time he just stood there in the middle of my kitchen. The same kitchen he had claimed as his son's. The same room he had walked into with the swagger of a man convinced of his authority. But now his shoulders slumped with a heaviness he hadn't shown before. The certainty had drained from his face, replaced by a fragile, fractured confusion that made him look far older than he had when he first barged in. He kept staring at the folder in my hand as if it were a weapon I had no right to hold, as if the truth it contained violated the very structure of his existence. The silence between us stretched long and sharp, thick with everything he wanted to say but could no longer justify. And though a part of me had expected him to lash out again, he didn't. Not this time. He wasn't used to losing. He wasn't used to being wrong. And he certainly wasn't used to being powerless. When he finally spoke, his voice was much softer than before. Smaller, almost fragile, like someone standing in the aftermath of an earthquake and trying to identify what pieces of themselves still remained. You don't understand, he whispered, shaking his head as though trying to dislodge the truth. I only ever wanted my son to succeed. I thought I was protecting him. I exhaled slowly, letting his words settle. They weren't an apology. They weren't even an explanation. They were a justification. The same justification he'd used his entire life. Every insult, every intrusion, every manipulation had always been cloaked in the language of protection, as though his love could excuse the damage he caused. You weren't protecting him, I said quietly. You were controlling him. There's a difference. He flinched as if the words struck a tender spot he didn't want exposed. He dropped into the chair again, his breathing uneven. He was supposed to build a life I could be proud of, he murmured as though confessing to himself rather than to me. He was supposed to choose better. Do better. Be better. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I stared at him, realizing something I hadn't fully understood until that moment. His control wasn't about the house. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about me. It was about the blueprint he had created in his mind years ago. A future in which his son mirrored his choices, his values, his expectations, right down to the kind of partner he married. When life deviated from that script, he saw it not as growth but as betrayal. You keep talking about what he was supposed to be, I said with a steadiness I didn't feel earlier. But have you ever once asked him what he wanted? He looked up sharply, caught off guard. Have you ever asked what kind of life he wants to build? What kind of person he wants to be? Or were you too busy deciding for him? The truth lodged in his throat like a stone he couldn't swallow. His jaw tightened, but no words came out this time. I took a step closer, not aggressively but firmly, the way someone steps forward into their own life after years of shrinking. You talk about pride, I continued. You talk about expectations. But the one person you refuse to see is your own son. He doesn't want your control. He doesn't want your interference. And he definitely doesn't want you barging into his home pretending you have rights you don't. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to defend himself, maybe to reach for the authority he had already lost. But I raised a hand to stop him. Don't, I said softly. There's no point pretending anymore. He closed his mouth slowly, the collapse in his expression evident now. For the first time he wasn't angry at me. He was angry at the realization of his own irrelevance. And that, I think, was the moment he finally understood the truth. The world had changed, but he hadn't. He clung to an identity that no longer fit, a version of fatherhood built on dominance instead of connection. And in doing so he pushed his son further away every year until there was almost nothing left between them but resentment. He took a shaky breath. What happens now? It wasn't a threat. It was a genuine question, tinged with something vulnerable and unfamiliar. Maybe dread. Maybe regret. Maybe the dawning awareness that the consequences he had triggered were no longer his to control. I placed the folder back into the drawer, calmly, deliberately, and turned to face him fully. What happens now, I said, is that you leave. The words settled into the room with a quiet finality that made even the air seem to pause. He blinked at me. You're kicking me out? A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. You tried to evict me from my own house, I reminded him. You threatened to bring people to forcibly remove me. You insulted me. You insulted your own son. And you did it all because you believed you had the authority to do so. I crossed my arms. But you don't. And now, yes, I'm asking you to leave. Because I won't tolerate this behavior in my home. He stood slowly, his shoulders hunched, his pride leaking through him like a punctured balloon. I didn't mean to. No, I cut in. You did mean to. You came here with a plan. With confidence. With paperwork you thought would back you up. You came here to assert control you never had. He lowered his gaze. And now, I continued, you're going to walk out the same door you walked in, but without taking a shred of your imagined authority with you. He opened his mouth again, but I beat him to it. And one more thing, I added, voice colder than I intended. If you ever show up unannounced again or try to pull a stunt like this, I will not hesitate to call the police. Because I have every legal right to protect my property, something you should have thought about before storming in. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was defeated. Slowly, painfully, he nodded. A small, reluctant dip of the head that signaled the collapse of a power he had clung to for decades. He shuffled toward the door, pausing for a moment as if waiting for me to soften, to retract my words, to restore the world he once ruled. But I didn't. I stood still, unblinking, unwavering. He stepped outside. And for the first time since I had known him, he looked back at me not with disdain, but with respect. A fractured, forced respect, but respect nonetheless. Then he left. I closed the door gently behind him, not slamming it, not locking it with dramatic finality, just closing it. Quietly. Peacefully. With ownership. This time, it was truly my door to close. When the video faded into silence, the room did not breathe. It simply existed, still, heavy, stunned, like the world had paused to let the truth sink fully into every crack and corner. My mother sat stiffly, trembling in a way I'd never seen, her face blotched with the kind of humiliation that doesn't fade quickly. My sister was wiping tears that kept coming faster than she could catch them. My brother was hunched over, elbows on his knees, running his hands over his face as though trying to erase the last 20 minutes from existence. I didn't speak. I didn't comfort. I didn't justify. I simply sat in the quiet power of hearing my father say, for the first time in front of all of them, what he had whispered to me so many times in private. You belong. They had spent years denying it. But he had cemented it in writing, in legal form, and now in his final recorded breath. The lawyer closed his laptop softly. This concludes the reading of the will, he said, his voice steady but gentler than before. There will be paperwork to sign, but for today we are finished. My mother snapped. This is not finished, she shouted, standing abruptly, her chair screeching across the floor. Her eyes were wild, panicked, desperate, enraged all at once. He was manipulated. He was pressured. He didn't know what he was signing. I will contest this. I will contest every single word. The lawyer took off his glasses, folded them slowly, and looked her dead in the eyes. Ma'am, he said, Your husband recorded that video precisely because he knew you would make this claim. He underwent a full mental capacity evaluation the day he signed these documents. The paperwork is notarized, witnessed, and affirmed by the state. You may challenge it, but you will not win." His words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered backward, gripping the edge of the table for support. Then she turned her fury toward me. "You think you deserve this?" she hissed. "You think you're entitled to take everything from this family? You think being at his bedside gives you the right to own what we built?" Her voice cracked on that last word. "We." A word she had used all her life as a weapon. To include some, to exclude others, to draw lines where none should exist. I stood up slowly, feeling something shift inside me. Not anger, not revenge, but the calm clarity of someone who has finally stopped begging for a place at a table they built themselves. "I didn't take anything," I said quietly. "Dad gave what he wanted to give. You erased me." He corrected it. My mother shook her head violently. "You are not family. You never were." My sister whispered, "Mom, stop." But she pushed her away. "No. You hear me?" she said, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "You don't deserve this house or these accounts or those shares. You don't deserve his name." The room froze as the weight of her words crashed down. And I felt something inside me finally break free. Not in pain. In release. "You're right," I said softly. She blinked, stunned by my agreement. "I don't need his name to validate my worth. I don't need your approval to exist. And I don't need a place in your version of this family." My sister started crying harder. My brother looked away, jaw trembling. I continued. "But I am his child. His eldest. His caregiver. His choice. That doesn't change because you don't like it." My mother's voice dropped to a low growl. "You'll regret this." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I think this is the first time in my life I won't." The lawyer cleared his throat gently. "If emotions are running high, we can reconvene another day." But I raised a hand. "No. I'm finished here." I walked to the door, passing my siblings. My sister reached out, grabbing my arm weakly. "I'm sorry," she whispered through her tears. "I didn't know he felt that way. I didn't know what Mom was doing. I didn't know." I met her eyes. "Yes, you did," I said gently. "You just didn't stop it." She crumpled at that, letting her hand fall away. "My brother didn't try to stop me. He just whispered. I didn't think he'd say it out loud." I replied, "He always said it. Just not where you could hear." When I reached the doorway, I paused and looked back at my mother. She sat rigid, broken pride clinging to her like a second skin, her hands trembling against her lap. She had spent years editing me out of my own family story. And in the end, she had edited herself into irrelevance. "Dad wanted peace," I said quietly. "But peace requires truth. And today the truth finally came out." She didn't answer. She couldn't. I walked out of the room. Out of the funeral home. Out of the shadow she had cast over me since childhood. The sunlight outside was warm, bright, startlingly gentle against my skin. For the first time in years, the air felt light. I took a deep breath. Tasted like freedom. Dad had given me more than a house. More than money. More than shares. He had given me my place back. My story back. My voice back. And I walked into the rest of my life knowing one unshakable truth. The family you're born into is not always the family you belong to. Sometimes, the only person who sees your worth is enough. If you enjoy stories like this, you want to be part of the 10% viewers who click on the like button. It makes us really happy. If you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly support us today by subscribing to this channel. This helps us to bring you more beautiful stories.